Hey guys, so this is going to be our last lecture on the research paper process, and then I'm going to be turning you loose a little bit until April 3rd, when you have your first set of note cards due to be doing some research paper. Obviously, I'll be available and you can chat with me on the phone or via email or your inbox in Canvas. But we're going to wrap up our last little bit of discussion on how to do the research process here and do a little bit of review on taking notes, and then you guys will be on your way to doing some of the actual research. So let's get started. All right, so we're talking about taking notes first today, and then I'll have a brief few slides on outline format and outlining when you get to that point in the process. So note cards. Obviously, we're not doing physical note cards, although we talked today in our video conference about some possibilities if you really want to do that, how that might be a possibility. So, but I want to gear this towards talking about digital note taking. So that's really what we're looking at. But obviously, if you want to find a way to make the physical note cards work, I'm open to that. So the note-taking process is simply, as you're reading through your sources, you gather information and you're recording it in your digital note cards. So it's just the process of, this is the research process, right? Reading, gathering information that you're going to use, or at least that you think you might use. It's not uncommon to gather some notes and then later on down in the process decide, I'm not going to use those. But that's fine. Those can still count towards your note card totals. As far as what you need to turn into me. Don't intentionally take notes you think you're not going to use just to fill space, because that's not productive. But it's okay if you get later on down the process and realize, I'm not going to use those particular notes because I just don't need them once you get to the paper writing process. Note cards help you in two ways. One way is that it allows you to easily organize and reorganize your information when planning. So that was kind of some of that stuff that we were talking about with sorting the note cards on the Word document. And Trinity, I hope you're able to figure out how to do that on Google Docs as well. And Paul Robert, I think you also didn't have Microsoft Word. So hopefully you guys can figure that out, and I will try to remember to look into that a little bit more. Remind me if you're still struggling to figure out how to do it. But that sorting function, right, and changing the keywords and the topic words in order to sort your notes so that you've got all the information about that one particular topic or area of your paper together, so that you can use that and find all of that information together when you're writing your paper. Taking notes in the form of a note card also helps you to avoid plagiarism, because you have to actually sift through information. And as I'm going to be asking you to take notes, not just quotations, but also paraphrases and summaries and other styles of note-taking, that can be very helpful in helping you to avoid just copying and pasting information, right? And helps you to synthesize the information and put it together in your own unique way, which is part of what we're looking for in the paper writing process. So, what to include on your digital note card: you need the name of the author, or if the source does not have an author, as is the case with some web sources, other information to identify your source. Typically, the first word or couple words of the title would be that other information, as we talked about yesterday with the in-text citations. A page number, if it's a book or a journal or anything that has page numbers, include the page number. And then a keyword to identify the topic, or a phrase, right? A keyword or a key phrase that helps you know what this note is about, right? And what part of your paper you're planning on using it in. That can be changed later, right? You can go back and change the keywords and decide, this isn't really what I'm going to write about, or this isn't really where I'm going to put that in my paper, I'm going to put it here instead. But you want to have those keywords so that you can find those notes and organize them. And that's really helpful when you get down to actually writing the paper. And then, of course, the actual note from the source. The whole reason you're taking the notes down is the note. All right, so if you were looking at a physical note card, this is kind of what you would be looking at. Obviously, ours are going to look a little bit differently in the digital format. But if you were looking at a physical note card, this would be something similar. And you can see a few different things here. You can see right here, this would be the keyword or phrase. So this person was obviously researching Walt Whitman, so influence of Whitman on other authors. And then you've got the page number here, and that's important because you need that in your in-text citation. In this format, and this is the way I would have typically done it if we had done physical note cards, I would have had you list a letter and then a number for that note, so that would tell you what source it was going with. In your context, and even if you decide to do physical note cards this year, just put the author's last name up here or that other identifying information. And then, obviously, you've also got the actual note itself there. Quite a lengthy one for this particular note. All right, so taking good notes. You should always strive to take good notes. And as I already mentioned, you should strive to take information that you think you're going to use, even if you decide you aren't going to use it later, but you think you're going to use that information at the time you take the note down. When you're taking good notes, you should consider several of the following. You should consider each note should have a single focus or idea. So you don't want to take tons and tons of different points on one note card to squeeze it all in. I'm not sure why you would want to do that anyways, because that would limit the number of note cards you have, and you're supposed to be meeting a mark of a certain number of notes for me. But you want your note card to be focused on a single idea. Now, that could be a very large idea that could have many subpoints if you're doing more of a summary style note, or it could be something very specific with a quote or a paraphrase. But each note card should have kind of one binding idea. Kind of think of it like a paragraph, right? You know how a paragraph is supposed to have one focus. Well, your note should have one focus. You also want to make sure that the notes are relevant to your paper. Don't be taking notes on things that don't really matter to your paper. The note should be the appropriate length, and I'm going to talk in a minute about length of notes, so we'll come back to that one. And then you should also try to take notes in a variety of note-taking styles. Don't make all your notes one style of note-taking. That's not going to provide the variety that you really need with your paper in order to craft a good research paper. So let's talk for a minute about length of notes. A good note is not always a long note. The length of the note should be determined by the information. Right? So some good notes are shorter and some good notes are longer. That's just kind of the way it is. It's not like a one-size-fits-all thing. So you should let whatever information you're getting determine how long that note needs to be. So you see two sample notes down here, and I'll turn off the camera preview here for a moment so you can hopefully see the notes a little bit better. Hopefully that's actually turning off the preview and not just, well, I don't know. If it's still covering it up, I'm sorry. I'm going to try to turn it off, but if it doesn't work, well, I apologize. There are two notes here, and you can see even if my screen is still a little bit up, you can see that one is much longer than the other. And it's all just determined by whether or not you need that much information, right? And so just let the information itself determine how long the note is. Keep in mind that idea of single focus, focusing on one particular thing, but whether that's longer or shorter, just let the information determine the length of the note. And don't be trying to meet a specific length or a specific shortness. Let the information itself determine that length. All right. As far as types of notes that you could take, so this gets to what I was saying about variety and note-taking styles. You can take notes that are quotations, which is copying the exact words, summary, which is hitting the main ideas of a large section of some text that you're reading in your own words, paraphrase, which is restating a smaller portion of the text in your own words. A fragment, which is just partial ideas, so just maybe just like words and ideas that you've jotted down, maybe a bullet point list even. It's enough to be meaningful, but it's not really crafted in any way. And then a combined quote or paraphrase is another thing you could do. You quote the best or most important words or the parts that the author just said really well, and then you shorten the rest that's not really important to have the author's exact words by paraphrasing it. All right, so using quotations. You should use direct quotations occasionally in your research. There should be quotations in your research paper. I will probably raise some flags if I don't see any quoting in your paper. You do want some quoting because it does serve a purpose, but it shouldn't necessarily be most of your notes, right? You want to have some quotations, but it shouldn't be most of your notes because you really want to write the paper in your own words. And so it's an important step in the process to take what you have read in your research and put it into your own words in the notes, and then kind of process it again even further in your own words when you're writing it in the paper. And that takes you several steps away from plagiarism. So use direct quotations occasionally. Here's when you should use them. When the author just says it in such a way that's just like really powerful, you couldn't say it any better, right? Now I know that sometimes you're thinking, well, the person is always saying it better than I could say it, but that's not actually true. Sometimes in certain articles, a person just says it simply and there's not really anything special about the way they say it, right? So if there's not anything special or powerful about the way they say it, then you don't necessarily need to quote their words exactly. Or sometimes if you're reading a really highly academic article and you've had to really sift through and sort through the language and be like, what are they saying? What does that mean? And you finally come to the conclusion where you understand what they're saying, you could in fact say it better. You could say it simply and more directly. Once you've sorted through that and you've understood what they mean, you can say that in a more direct manner, and you could actually say it better than they could. There are tons of academic writers out there who are not good at expressing their ideas, right? Because expressing ideas is all about communication. And so if they're not communicating well, they may have good ideas that you want to use, but you might be able to say it better than they did. Another reason when you should use quotations is when it will be effective in emphasizing a point. So if you're using this to say, hey, I'm not the only one who makes this claim, so-and-so also says this is true. Or here's a quote from the book to prove that the time machine is science fiction, right? When you're using quotations to kind of emphasize a point, that's another really good place to use them. So some tips for using location. I'm going to try to minimize my video here again, whether or not it works. So some tips for using quotations. If you only want to include part of the quote, note the sections you left out with an ellipsis, all right? So this is very common, especially in a research paper. You may not want to use every single word that the author used. You want to use parts of what they said. If you leave anything out, it's honest to let the reader know that you left something out of the quote. This is typically only if it's in the middle of the quote. If what you left out was at the beginning or at the end, people will assume that you obviously did not quote their entire work, right? But if you're leaving something out in the middle of a portion that you're writing, use an ellipsis, which is those 3 periods, to note that something was pulled out here. You pulled something out and you omitted it. If you are quoting material, quote it in your source. Okay, so what that means is that if you are, say the source that you're reading quotes someone else, right, which may very likely happen, then you would replace their double quotes with single quotes and then put double quotes around the thing that you quoted from the source that you're actually looking at. So there's a little bit of an example down here. The word silly, which today means foolish. Okay, so that was in double quotes in my original source material. I've put it in single quotes, and I put double quotes around the whole thing. Once meant helpless and defenseless. Okay, again, that's in single quotes, which means in my source material, it was in double quotes. So I put double quotes around the information from the source material, and then I put single quotes around anything that had double quotes in the source material. So that would just be if you're quoting something that someone else is quoting, right? And that very likely could happen in your research. All right, paraphrases are another type of note that you could take. Try to paraphrase more than you quote, because this will help with the flow of your paper and putting things into your own words. However, when you paraphrase, you're not simply finding another word for everything the author says. Okay, so you should not be using a thesaurus to paraphrase. You're not just replacing words. And so you shouldn't be just saying, like, okay, how could I say this, but I need to say it in my own words, so I'm going to change things, right? The idea is that you would read the source material, and that you would understand it, and then that you would turn and you would write it down in your own words. So I often say it's a great idea when you're paraphrasing to read it, close the source or look away from the source, and then write what you learned from that source in your own words without looking at it, right? And then afterwards you could go back and say, did I capture the essence of what the author was trying to say there correctly? Did I get the main ideas? But don't necessarily be staring at the material you're trying to paraphrase when you're paraphrasing it, because it's important to kind of put it into your own words and process it the way that's unique to you. All right, some tips for using paraphrases. Read the section carefully. Pay particular attention to the overall meaning as well as keywords and phrases, because that will help you get the main ideas, right? So basically use good reading skills when you're reading what you're researching. And then as you write the paraphrase, be sure to do these things. Stick to the essential information, right? Don't get hung up on all the details, because a paraphrase could be shorter than the original material. Stick to the essential information. Again, not trying to copy all of the author's words, but just what's essential about this. State each important idea clearly and concisely, right? So your paraphrase should be clear. It shouldn't make it more confusing than the original author's words. You should make it less confusing. Arrange ideas into a smooth, logical order. So your thing should be as easy to read as the original or easier, right? And it's very often the case that you're taking a complicated idea that was explained in a difficult way in some source, and you're making it easier for the average reader to understand. That's a really great use of a paraphrase. Keep the original writer's ideas and point of view clear. So you're paraphrasing, you're putting it into your own words, but you still need to be true to what the original author said. You can't be making up your own stuff and saying that that author said that. That's kind of reverse plagiarism, and it's not academically honest, right? And so you want to be sure that you're still representing the author's ideas accurately, even though you're presenting them in your own words. And then construct a new word order, right? So don't try to mimic or copy the word order of the original author's material. That's just going to be too close to quoting, and it's just going to be confusing, right? So you shouldn't be trying to mimic the word order. You should just kind of be letting your own words form this in a new way, the way that you would naturally say it. You can effectively combine a paraphrase with a quotation, paraphrase parts that are not super important, and then quote the best parts, right? Quote the parts where the author really had some really powerful words to use, but then paraphrase the other sections. All right, so here's some examples. Here's an example of a bad phrase. So the source material says, Robert Burns, a talented Scottish poet, is generally considered the best poet of his nation. This would be a bad example of paraphrasing if you said, Robert Burns, an endowed Scots sonetist, was universally examined as the best rhymer of his monarchy. Okay, all that happened there was that someone went through with a thesaurus and just replaced certain words with other words. and not even accurate words, right? Just because you're a poet doesn't mean that you're a sonetist, right? Just because you write poetry doesn't mean you write sonnets. Endowed is a kind of weird word. It hasn't made this easier to read. Talented is certainly easier to read than endowed. More people know what talented means. Was universally examined. Kind of seems like we placed him on a medical table and we're prodding him, right? And looking at his vital signs. It's not an accurate representation of what the source material is trying to say. And the best rhymer of his monarchy, again, there's nothing, well, we don't know for sure that Scotland was a monarchy. I mean, we know that it was, but that's not necessarily given information, right? And you can't just make that assumption when you're paraphrasing. And besides, he's not really in the monarchy, right? So it's just a weird way to say it. And rhymer is an odd way to say poet. Here's an example that's slightly better, but still is perhaps a little bit too close to just kind of copying the source material and changing the words. Robert Burns, the gifted Scottish bard, is usually viewed as the preeminent author of his country. Now, I would say this one doesn't have some of the problems that the last one did. This one is still fairly easy to read, fairly straightforward. It's not any more difficult to read than the source material. The problem I have with this one is that it's still too close to the original source material. So you haven't really changed any of the structure. You haven't worded it in any new way. It's not really been processed in your own thoughts and put out in your own words. You're still kind of mimicking what the original author said. You've just replaced words, right? You've replaced talented with gifted. You've replaced poet with bard. You've replaced best. You've replaced considered with viewed. You've replaced best with preeminent. You've replaced poet with author. And you've replaced nation with country. All of those are pretty good synonyms. They're easy to understand. It works well, it reads well, but it's just, if you're going to stay that close to the original, why not just quote it? Here's a much better example of a paraphrase. This is a good example of how paraphrasing should work. So instead of kind of mimicking it closely, it's been transformed and said in a new way. Many scholars believe that Robert Burns was one of the greatest poets Scotland has ever seen. All right, essential information has remained the same general ideas come across, but it's been taken and worded in a way that's not imitating the author's original words. And it's just been processed more in the way that I would say it, right? I made these examples, so it's more the way that I would say it. But this is a much better idea. I've read the source material and then I have looked at what it said and understood what it said and expressed that in my own way of saying it. All right, another major type of note that you could take is summary. And you're usually going to use summary when you're looking at a large portion of a text and you're trying to just get the bare essentials out of it. So this would be like several pages of a text that you're going to summarize into one note, right? And that can be very effective sometimes. So you're just taking notes on the main ideas of this topic and of this section of material and not all the details. Here's a sample summary note card. This is a great example. So you can see up here in this corner that this came from several pages of the text, pages 48 to 51. And so they're not just looking at one particular piece of information, but they're looking at a much larger section of the text, and they're just kind of getting the main points from there. And what they're getting in this particular case is 8 reasons that people censor books. Usually book censorship happens in schools, right? And so they're looking at 8 reasons that people censor books, and they're not really interested in all the details about each of these reasons. They're just wanting to know what are the reasons people typically censor books. The source material probably delved into this in quite a bit of detail for each of these 8 examples, probably had 1 or 2 paragraphs on each of these things, but they're just interested in the reasons, and so they're just taking a summary. And so you can see they listed the 8 reasons that their source gave, and that was pretty much all. And so that's a great example of what you might be doing in summary. All right, so that was information about taking notes and the three main styles of doing that. Obviously, you could take bullet point fragment notes, and we did mention that you could combine quotations and paraphrases as well as another style of note taking. I want to turn briefly to talking about outlining your paper so that you can refer back to this video when the outlining time comes. And some of you may want to start working on the outline as you're doing your research and kind of figuring that out. So I didn't want to wait on that until it was time to do the outline. I wanted to give you some opportunity to kind of be working fluidly as the process should be worked, right? The process should be a fluid process where you're doing multiple stages at once. And so as you're researching, you may want to begin constructing your outline. And so I wanted to talk about some basics there. Organizing your note cards based on topic is really helpful when you're going into the outlining stage, because that will help you group ideas together. And that's what you're beginning to do in the outline, is to take all this various information that you've researched and begin to put it into an organized whole, right? And outlining is so crucial in the research process. It's more than just saying what you're going to talk about, right? It's actually taking all this information you've gathered and trying to bring some sort of order out of the chaos of the research process, because the research process is a little chaotic and you jump from here to there and you take notes on different sources and you haven't really organized it yet. And so the outline is the process of organizing. And so the note cards can be helpful in doing that. And so that's why that sort function that I showed you is so important. So you want to make sure that you have clearly labeled note cards with keywords and topic ideas, and try to use the same topic labels on your note cards as you use in your outline, right? So that you can easily associate them with one another. So here's a basic example of outline format. And this is just the traditional MLA format for an outline. And so for this paper, I've been kind of loose with the actual formatting of the outline in the past, because we weren't talking very much about MLA format. But since we are talking about MLA format for this paper, I would like you to construct your outline in MLA format. Now, obviously, you're going to move back and forth between these levels when you're actually creating your own outline. You're not just going to do 2 points on one level and then go down like it shows here. But I wanted to show you the different levels, right? So level 1 should be denoted with Roman numerals. All right, and so that's kind of how you mark the beginning of that point, is with Roman numerals. And when you go down a level, it's capital letters. When you go down a level from there, it's Arabic numerals. When you go down a level from there, it's lowercase letters. And then when you go down a level from there, it's lowercase Roman numerals. If you need to go any further than that, you just start over. But most people never need to go further than 5 levels. That's an incredibly detailed outline if you do that. So you probably shouldn't need more than 5 levels when you're writing your paper. But that shows you that, so we're talking about really just this right here, and that is the thing that you label each point with, all right? Now, I do want to point out some things on this particular slide. When you're doing your outline, you don't need to start really big, like up here, and then work to really small when you get to the lower levels. That's just something with the way the slide was pre-formatted to do. And I left it because it allowed me to fit everything on the slide. Also, in an official outline, you should probably not have these bullet markers and the points, okay? So no bullet markers on your outline, just use like the Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, A, B, Arabic 1 and 2. Use those as your bullet point markers, right? Rather than actual bullet point markers. All right, one simple guideline on outline formatting. I am asking, there's kind of 2 traditional styles to do an outline: a sentence outline where every point on your outline is a full sentence, or a topical outline where you just have words and phrases marking every point on your outline. And what I would like you to do on this one is to follow the official MLA rules, which state that you either do a sentence outline or a topic outline. Meaning, if you're going to do a sentence outline, every single point on your outline should be a full sentence. Some people really like that form because it means they have less work to do when they actually get to writing the paper, because they can import sentences and then they just kind of have to fill in the gaps and make things flow from one sentence to the other. Other people don't prefer that because it seems like a lot of work up front. So you can also use a topical outline if you want, where you just use a word or a phrase for each point, but not complete sentences. But I am going to ask on this particular project that you do not mix those things. So don't be mixing sentence and topic outlines, but try to choose one or the other. Another important outline format rule is that points always come in pairs. So if a point doesn't have a partner, it shouldn't be especially a subpoint, right? If a subpoint doesn't have a partner, it shouldn't be a subpoint. It should be the main point, all right? Because you don't have multiple subpoints. And so it's just one point. It's just that main point. So that general guideline is if you have a point A, you should at least have a point B. Now you could have a point C, D, E, F, however many you wanted, right? To go along with that if there were lots of different points. But if you've got a point A, you do need at least a point B. Otherwise, that point A should be Roman numeral 1 or Roman numeral 2 or Roman numeral 3, right? It should be the main point, not a subpoint. So if you have a point A, you should have a point B. Same thing, if you've got a point 1, you need a point 2. If you've got a point lowercase a, you need a point lowercase b, right? So points come in pairs, subpoints I should say, subpoints come in pairs. If it doesn't have a partner, it should be the main point, not the subpoint. All right, so that brings us to the end of our information about research paper and the end of my lecture. I'm going to be available for questions and comments and to help you guys out. So make use of that resource. I'm still here to guide you through the research process, even though we have to do this from a distance, but I'm still here to help and encourage you and help you through the writing process. Make use of that. Here are some of my sources on all of this information on the research paper. And here are some links as well to some other things. I'll continue to be putting up helpful information on the Canvas page and keep you updated when I do that. Your next deadline is simply the April 3rd deadline with your first set of note cards. And I know different ones of you, like depending on the section of the class that you're taking and different factors, you have different numbers of note cards that you should be taking. So make sure to follow the guidelines that I've given you on that in particular for that checkpoint. So you've got your first checkpoint on April 3rd. There's not going to be tons and tons of new content on Canvas. Until then, I may occasionally post resources, and I'll try to keep in communication and check in with you guys and see how you're doing. But this is a time of kind of working on your own and making sure you're making progress. If you need someone to check in with you on a regular basis to see how you're doing, just because you need that accountability and you need the help not procrastinating, let me know, and I will certainly do that for you. I will make sure that I will check in with you guys and help you if that's what you need. So I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Got tongue-tied there for a second. Hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and let me know if you've got questions, and happy researching.